Good afternoon in the Eastern and Central time zones, and good morning, good people of the Mountain and Pacific West. I am Janet Topolsky. I'm Executive Director of the Community Strategies Group at the Aspen Institute, and I'm very happy today to join with our partners, the Center for Heirs Property Preservation, and inviting you, or welcoming you actually, to All Land is Not Created Equal or Creating Equal, Unleashing Family and Community Wealth Through Land Ownership. Organizing today's introductory session, which we're just starting now, and our deep dives later today into heirs property and what to do about it has been a year in the making, or all year in the making, I should say. The Community Strategies Group at the Aspen Institute was founded 35 years ago this year, and we've been engaged since then in convening and connecting, equipping, inspiring local leaders across the United States as they build more prosperous regions, but also while they're advancing those living on the economic and social margins at the same time. And more than 75% of the work that we've done over that 35 years has been in rural America. You know, that mission and this question brings us to all of our work. What will it take for communities and native nations across the rural United States to be healthy places where everyone belongs, lives with dignity, and thrives? And we're really here to address that question and pieces of that question as embodied in the heirs property and fractionated land issue. As part of our work, we were honored to be around for the founding of the Center for Heirs Property Preservation, as well as the work that led to its creation. And here now in our 35th year, and with the center, we're happy to say, is in its 15th year. So we're sort of celebrating our anniversaries together, and we decided to celebrate it together by reading in a lot of the rest of the country and what this issue is. What is heirs property? What is fractionated land? What is its role in perpetuating wealth inequality? What's its importance to building family wealth? And what does it take to address heirs property and fractionated issues to build family wealth and community wealth? And I'm going to describe how our different segments today are going to do that in a few minutes. But first of all, I want to introduce my colleague and one of my inspirations, Dr. Jenny Stevens. She is the founding and still CEO of the Center for Heirs Property Preservation, and she's going to just start us out by offering a basic definition of what heirs property is before we go any further. Jenny?
Good morning and afternoon, everyone. It is a pleasure to have this opportunity to collaborate with my friend and thought partner, Janet, again, and to meet Dr. Oliver. So for us, the layperson's definition of heirs property is land that has been passed down without a will, or the loved ones of the deceased individual did not probate that person's estate within the time allotted by state law. Therefore, the deed to the property remains in the name of the deceased individual, and his or her heirs now own this land jointly, which makes it difficult to own and manage.
Thank you, Jenny.
You're welcome.
Now, what I want to do is introduce the fellow who is going to moderate our exchange for this opening session, this first couple hours of the day. Melvin Oliver is the current president of Pitzer College, which is one of the 5 Claremont colleges in California, which have quite a wonderful reputation. He's also had significant dean and academic appointments at UC Santa Barbara, UCLA, and I'm not even sure what else, but he can tell us that he thinks it's important. But I met Melvin a few years back when he was serving as the vice president for asset building and community development at the Ford Foundation. And in fact, Melvin was vice president at that time when Ford made the first grant that eventually led to the creation of the Center for Heirs Property Preservation. Now, one of the reasons the Ford Foundation tapped Melvin to be vice president back then in the late 90s was that he, along with Thomas Shapiro, had co-authored what is a seminal piece called Black Wealth, White Wealth, A New Perspective on Racial Inequality. It was groundbreaking when it was released in 1995 and clearly laid the groundwork for a lot more research and analysis that has followed it, even up to this day. So considering all of this, we thought he'd be the perfect fellow to lead the conversations in our opening session today. So Melvin, welcome. Would you like to just share a few opening comments about why, when we asked you to do this, you thought it was important enough that you said yes?
Well, thank you, Janet, and I certainly would like to say a few words. First, I was so pleased to be asked to moderate the plenary session today of the Center for Heirs Property Preservation's 15th anniversary. This is a subject that's very close to my intellectual concerns and policy focus. The issue of wealth inequality is one that's on the mind of many today, but in 1995, when Thomas Shapiro and I published Black Wealth, White Wealth, it was only coming into public view. Black wealth, white wealth highlighted the devastating difference between Blacks and whites' control of wealth, where whites have a 10-to-1 advantage. We explored the role that state policies, organizational rules, and private decisions had on structuring this racial inequality. In the context of today's concern, I think we demonstrated how wealth differences were the product of systemic racism, in which the accumulation of wealth for some whites was intimately tied to the poverty for most Blacks. Thus, systematic racism produced cumulative disadvantages for Blacks and cumulative advantages for whites that led to growing racial inequality from generation to generation. Land was a key form of wealth in that process. While Blacks were promised 40 acres and a mule, they did not generally receive it. But the first generation of freedmen and generations after used whatever resources they could cobble to take advantages of opportunities to buy and own land, no matter its condition or the land's ability to provide a sustainable livelihood. At the height of Black land ownership in 1910, African-American farmers owned 15 million acres of land. By 1997, Black Americans owned just 3.8 million acres of land. This monumental land loss has contributed mightily to the wealth gap. As Janet pointed out, in 1996, when I was vice president of the Ford Foundation, we made a philanthropic investment in the then Coastal Community Foundation. Working with the Aspen Institute Community Strategies Group, they birthed what has become the Center for Heirs Property Preservation. So today, I'm very happy that we're going to learn from a range of fascinating and impactful people more about the context in which they work, the continuing problems of heirs property, how they are successfully addressing it, and the role of key partners in that process. I'm looking forward to being your guide today on this interesting journey.
Thank you, Melvin. So now what I want to do as we get started is just to give you a sense of what's going to happen today. And as many of you know, because we've sent plenty of emails trying to remind you that there are a number of sessions you can take advantage of, there are three major segments to today. First of all, right now, until about 3:10 ET, and that would be 12:10 Pacific time, and you can fill in the gaps. We're going to do this overview session that's really going to have multiple segments in it. It's going to have a few 5-minute videos with stories of landowners or people who've experienced the heirs property situation. We're going to have segments about the background that led to it. How did this come into being? Going into more depth about what Melvin just said. And then we're also going to have a session about the Center for Heirs Property, what it's accomplished, and other people that have been working on heirs property and fractionated land, which is what it's generally called in Native American communities. And we're also going to have a segment on partnerships that could really make more happen to address the issue of heirs property or the potential for those partnerships. So that's what's going to happen in the overview session. Then we're going to take a break and we're going to run 5 breakouts where if you want to dive deeply into one of these, some of the speakers that are in the plenary session and a whole host of other speakers are going to be in these breakouts. And they're more sort of discussion. Yeah, there are people leading it, but you're going to have more chance to ask questions. At the end of today's session, I'll list what those breakouts are, although they're also on the agenda that was sent to you. And so you'll be able to attend 2 of them, because what we're going to do is repeat them, because we know whenever you go to a conference or something like that, you want to go to 2 workshops at the same time. So we're really going to repeat them so you can go to 2 of them. And then this evening, we've got the special event with America's Worst with Chuck Leavell. Chuck Leavell is like the keyboard player for the Rolling Stones and like the Allman Brothers Band before and many others, but he also happens to be a tree forester, and he has put together this PBS series or a series produced for PBS on America's Forest, and did a whole segment, less than half an hour on, just less than half an hour on Ayers property. So we're going to have Chuck, we're going to have Jenny, we're going to have Jenny's board chair and me, and we'll have some chance for Q&A after viewing the video this evening. So those are the 3 main segments. You can come to all of them, you can come to some of them. We're happy to have you at any or all of it. So let me then talk to you just a little bit about logistics here. Clifford, if you can move to the next slide. So we're going to have an intermission between this intro session and then the breakouts. The breakouts will start at 3:45 and 4:45 sharp. They'll each be 45 minutes. Each breakout session has its own unique Zoom link, and those Zoom links are in the agenda that you were sent today and yesterday, I believe. So you can just you can click on them. We're also going to send an email during this opening session that's going to give you also a way to access the unique link for each breakout session. So you can go back and forth between breakout sessions too. You can leave one and go into another, sort of like moving from room to room when you're at a conference. If you haven't received those links, we're also going to put it in the chat box by the end of the session, or it might be in there already. So you can get sort of a link that gives you all of them. Then after the breakouts, we're going to have another intermission. And then we'll start the session with Chuck Leavell at 6 p.m. ET. One final note, as soon as possible in the next few days, we are going to have a recording of the breakouts as well as the main session, the entire event. And all of these segments will be available on the Aspen CSG event page. And I bet the Center for Ayers Property Preservation will put them on their webpage too. So that will be sent to everyone who's registered. So with that, finally, your mics are muted. If you have any tech issues, please put them in the chat box because we have people standing by to help you. I see some people have already been using it. Also, if you want to underline anything anyone's saying, feel free to share your insights. People love to read chat while these things are going on. Share your thoughts with civility and compassion, though, if you would be so kind. Save your questions for the breakout sessions. And finally, if you want to tweet your experience today, use both or one of these hashtags, hashtag rural innovation and hashtag Ayers property. And with that, I think I'm going to kick it over to, if I'm not mistaken, I'm going to kick it over to Jenny, who is going to intro our first 5-minute video. Jenny?
Yes. So it's always better to hear from someone who's benefited from your work. So at this time, I'm going to introduce to you our client, William Mackey, and his brother, Gerald, and they will share their perspective on how they've been helped through the Center for Ayers Property Preservation.
I'm Gerald, and this is my brother William, and we are legal clients for the center. Our mother died in 1988, and at that time, she died intestate. We're her 2 heirs, but her name was still on the deed entitled to the property. And so we did not, 32 years ago when she died, I was not familiar with all of the probate process that people are more knowledgeable of today. My brother, who's blind, he lost his vision at 43, and he wanted to stay in the house, but the house needed some work. And a lot of the nonprofit agencies that I contacted at the time would not do the work because our mother's name was still on the deed and title. So I contacted an attorney to see what we can do to remove her name. And this law firm said it was a starting point was $10,000. So I thought that was a bit exorbitant just to get our mother's name off the the title, since we are her apparent heirs. As divine providence would have it, my church had the outreach program had the heirs preservation agency to do a workshop at the church, and I attended that workshop. And they talked about heirs preservation, and they talked about forestry, how people can go to keep their land and help to pay the taxes on the land if they have a lot of trees and that kind of stuff. A whole bunch of services that the agency provides. Attorney Hope Watson was very helpful along the way and getting us on the docket at the court to have my mother's name removed from the deed and title. And just the two of us, our names are now on that deed and title. So he is now open to more services that he would not have been able to if her name was still on the deed and title.
He spoke to Attorney Hope Watson, and then she figured out, explain everything to us.
He prefers staying in his own house, his own independence, and he does well on his own. And so he will now be able to get some of the services again because of his income, a lot of things that he can't do financially. The nonprofit agencies will be able to come in. So having that clear title is a great relief. A great relief. With my mother's name on the property, still on the property, even though she was deceased over 30 years, we were not able to get certain tax exemption, like the 4% tax exemption that he would have qualified for. He would not have been able to get a lot of the services through the nonprofit agencies because her name was on the property. The center is a godsend, and especially for people who don't have the financial means to go and do the title search, hire an attorney to do all of that they need done. The center has done a wonderful job for us, and I'm sure it worked for other people. And in fact, I even mentioned that I hope that workshop that we had at our church would be a regular thing because it was open to the public, the entire community. So we had people from all over the Sea Island, as far away as Edisto Island, Wadmalaw Island, Johns Island, even the city of Charleston attending that session that Saturday. The center charge, I think it was maybe just to do the deed and the recording, and I think that came out to, in the paperwork, that less than $300. And that's a far cry from $10,000 plus. I couldn't believe it myself. And they no charge for the service, the legal services. Only thing they charged for was, again, filing the paperwork with the courts and the Register of Deeds office and those kinds of things. Well, as I said, I just want to give a shout out to the center because they have helped us tremendously. And again, when you look at the cost that a law firm had offered, proposed, and what we were able to, the service we were able to get through the center, there is no comparison. And I feel totally indebted to the center, and I'm sure William does as well.
Just to say, the center really helped us a great deal.
That was a great video. Really shows the importance of the center and preserving assets, land assets, for those who are in heirs property. This is our first session. We're going to look at the history and context of heirs property. We have two sessions within one. The first, we're going to look at the power, problems, and promise of land ownership, and we have two excellent speakers, very experienced Lizzie Presser, a journalist with ProPublica. She writes on inequality, how social policy is experienced, and health. She's award-winning, And her piece on heirs property is an amazing piece of journalism. And we have Faith River James, who's Assistant Provost for Leadership, Department Head and Professor of Leadership Studies at the Citadel. Faith will be speaking on issues that she's very intimately knowledgeable about, and also one of those people who have experienced fractionated property arrangements, as many in the African American community have. So I'm going to start talking to you a little bit, Lizzie. It's great to have journalists interested in this topic. How did you come to write about heirs property, and what have you learned?
I'm so glad to be here. So thank you for having me, all of you. And that was a great video. And I think it helped us ease into this story that I was working on. So I came to the story because I have dropped an ear pod, so hold on. I came to the story after I read a statistic that about 1% of America's farmers were Black. And I just found that statistic to be troubling, and I wanted to understand how that could possibly have come to be the case. And after I read and had read various articles about the USDA discrimination against Black farmers, I found this small corner of scholarship on heirs property and realized how much there was to expose in that world still. As you've heard, heirs property is land that's passed down without a will usually, and it's inherited and fractionated interests. And there was very good reason for families to be unwilling to work with lawyers or courts in the Jim Crow South. And so what I was starting to see as I started to research in the Carolinas primarily was that there were areas of the Carolinas and communities where many families didn't have a clear title to their land. And that meant that they couldn't use that land as collateral for loans even. So for FEMA funding, for HUD loans, for private funding. And they would watch their property often fall into disrepair without the same means of taking care of it as neighbors. I focus primarily on the legal loopholes that are often used by speculators to dispossess heirs property owners. And I told that story through the experience of one family that had been struggling to hold on to this gorgeous plot of coastline land right on the marshes in North Carolina, and 15 acres, which is now worth easily $500,000, had been taken from them without their knowledge or consent. And I focused on two brothers who were so attached to that land and so morally committed to the principle that it was theirs, that they wanted to sacrifice their liberty and go to jail before they agreed to give up the property and walk away for speculators to take over it. And so part of the story was really unearthing the legal mechanisms that are used across the South. And I looked particularly in North Carolina. And then on top of that, exploring some of the emotional cost of being told that this land is no longer yours. Oh, I'm having trouble hearing you, Melvin. I think you're muted.
Lizzie, I didn't unmute. That is the Zoom curse of being on Zoom. I found your story to be so compelling, but the other thing that I found is that it is about the economic resource, but it's also about the cultural resource. It's about the meaning land has for this family and the whole Black community. So could you tell us a little bit about that, especially the beach and the historical underpinnings of what that means for that community?
Yeah, it was, so the land that I was writing about, again, was on the beach, and it was the only beach in the county that Black families in Carteret felt safe going to under Jim Crow laws. And so it had established itself really as a meeting point for families that wanted to let loose and enjoy themselves when they didn't feel like they could do that anywhere else. And one of the protagonists of the story is a man named Melvin. And Melvin was so committed to this property that he had built this amazing club where he would hold dance parties. And then on top of that, that was the weekend. And then on top of that, he had taught the entire community around them how to shrimp and how to fish. And he was a very well-established shrimper in the county and on the coastline, really. And that's how he had made his money. He had worked for himself, and he had helped people around the area develop the skills to make money for themselves as well. So once that land came under threat and they started to receive letters about a possible takeover, it would destroy their livelihood. And they would also destroy kind of their identities. Like Melvin was a man of the water. And at this point, he was seeing all of these sheriffs come down and tell him, no, you don't have access to this water anymore. It was a part of their family identity. And that's what was being threatened, as well as, of course, these economic resources of, the food that they could catch.
Another thing you pointed out was the importance of having clear title for benefits, especially during natural disasters. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so this was something that wasn't necessarily related as much to the Reels family, who I focused on, as other families. But one of the things that shocked me most was after Katrina, there was a report that came out that 25,000 families who had applied for assistance weren't able to get it because they had heirs property. And a real estate lawyer estimated that it was up to $165 million in recovery funds that were never realized, that people just simply could not get access to. And there's no excuse for that. There has to be a way around that. And there are ways around that. And that's up to the government to codify. What I was able to see in North Carolina and South Carolina too were parts of the coastline, which are obviously increasingly threatened by floods, that had really fallen into disrepair, and at no fault of the homeowner, right? Those people who are living in those homes, who are paying those taxes, who are taking care of the property, don't have the means to get the loans that other people who have clear title do. And you could see it quite visibly.
Thank you. Faith, I'd like to bring you in because you have some historical kinds of understanding of the underpinnings of what Lizzie uncovered. Could you kind of give me a sense of the milestone developments that led to the current day situation with heirs property and fractionated land?
Great. Well, thank you, Melvin, and thank you to everyone for having me. I am a child of the Low Country and a part of the Gullah Geechee community. And unfortunately, the stories she just shared with you is something that I've seen people go through and watch people experience all around me, and even experience it in my family. And so it really is a situation where the power of land was really recognized during the Civil War. And we had a large group of African Americans buy property during the Civil War in the Beaufort area. And so from that example of power in holding land, it really did plant the seeds of the dream of land ownership for African Americans all throughout the South. But South Carolina in particular was the place where Sherman made his promise of 40 acres and a mule. And that was sort of the third try of the government to make some accommodation for these freedmen who had great skills as agricultural workers, but had no land to put those skills to work and to make money. And so finally Sherman came along, they promised 40 acres and a mule, and Washington reneged on the offer. And we ended up in a situation where at least African Americans were able to purchase land through the direct tax sales. And as a reflection of that power, if you ever heard of Robert Smalls, who was a hero of the Civil War and became a Union officer, Robert Smalls was able to, during that period of direct tax sales, purchase the home of the family that had owned him. Robert Smalls' great-great-grandson was George Peyton, who worked in the Hilton Head area back in the 70s to help families hold on to their land. George Payton is my sister's father. And so there is a grand legacy of people who have given their lives to protect the land, to understand how it operates, and to help the community, better yet, understand the power of it, and then also the problems that we face.
Now, I'm one of those families whose origin is the South, and I'm a fractionated landowner. Could you give us a kind of a concrete example of how land becomes dispossessed in that fractionation process?
Right. Well, and it's interesting in that there is a concept in property law. I'm a law professor and I teach property. And the challenge is that tenancy in common which is the actual legal phrase for heirs property. But all these heirs have a right to use the property and they have an interest in it. The challenge is that interest goes down. It is divisible. You can sell it. You can pass it on to someone else. And when you die, it goes to your descendants. That is the option that the founders of our nation made in figuring out how we pass land down from one generation to the next. And the reason that's important is because England had a different system. They consolidated title. A lot of those people came to America because they couldn't purchase land. So in America, we made the choice to divide the title. That was to keep us from having these big landholders and to give, the common man an opportunity to own property. But for heirs property owners, it works to our disadvantage because the law gives you these rights, but it never tells you how to share the responsibilities. And so as heirs, all of us who have a fractionated interest in land have to take the affirmative step to figure out how you can take care of the taxes for the property, how you might do things like the center does in helping you generate revenue through forestry on your land. So there's a huge amount of trust that family members have to have in each other and confidence that they can navigate this process. The fact that it is broken down into tiny shares, depending on the number of generations, disadvantages families when there's a disagreement. And typically that disagreement ends up in a court system and judges have the option to sell the property or divide it. If families affirmatively ask for the property to be divided and divided up amongst those heirs, they stand a much better chance of being able to hold on to it. But if your fractionated interest fight ends up in court and the judge says, I don't know how to divide that. I can't divide 2 acres by 100, he's going to sell it. And any of us know that when you go down to the courthouse to buy a house on foreclosure sale, you don't want to pay top value. And so the same applies to partition sales. No one wants to pay you the true value of the property. And so working with the center, and I worked at the South Carolina Bar Foundation, our goal was to help people understand the wealth that they owned in that property if they could consolidate the title and make decisions about the land together instead of in a disagreement.
But sometimes the fractionated land is what would I say, a pretext for others to purchase it. How does that work? And Lizzie, you can jump in on this if you have any examples as well.
Well, I'm sure Lizzie will have great examples, well, terrible examples actually. But the challenge is that that fractionated interest in the land, as I said, you can sell it. And so developers have had a strategy since the 60s and 70s when George Payton was working on these cases. They would go and find an heir who had a share, typically someone in New York or Detroit, somewhere outside of the South who wasn't really connected to the land. And then I've also heard judges explain that it really was a strategy to take deeds to bars and get inebriated people to sign over their interest. And so what happens is that that developer stands in your shoes just like another member of the family. And the developer, with the intent of never having a part of it, the developer can go to court and say, well, judge, I own 1/100th, and so I'd like my 1/100th share. And the judge says, okay, well, we'll have to sell the whole thing. And that was the tragedy of how partition has worked. And that's how you end up with families in disarray, because you have strangers to the deed showing up in court and buying land that was not for sale.
I will just add that Faith summarized that beautifully, and everything she talked about were things that I saw on the ground in North Carolina and South Carolina happening to this very day. This is not a historical problem. This is also a current problem. I watched one family really struggle after a nearby farm had bought some interest off of a couple of family members, one of whom had dementia. No, I've lost this again. I'm so sorry. And now you can no longer hear me, but you do get the point.
we can hear you.
You're good.
Okay, I've left the screen, but I'm back. Yeah, one of whom had dementia, and then they were unable to outbid the farmer when they went to the courthouse steps. And they tried to approach the farmer, they tried to speak with the farmer, and they had no ability to make any headway, and they lost that property. I watched another family fight as PCS Phosphate, a phosphate mining company, had bought off heirs who were, as Faith said, didn't live there, had no connection geographically to the property. And this family fought very hard. And in part of their appeal, they said, look, our family members are buried here. Like, this is our family cemetery. This is our heritage. And that is a story I heard over and over again. And again, they had very little means to fight back.
Well, this gets to the point that while that land might not have been the best land when it was bought, there's been a change in the value of that land over time. So there are different interests now interested in the Black land that is in the South, Black land that is in urban areas through gentrification. And what has that meant for land loss and the use of heirs' property to consolidate in the hands of more affluent people?
Well, I'll say from the Charleston perspective in the Low Country, the thing that is interesting about the Sherman promise was that he was going to turn over land that was coastal. That was because no one else wanted it. But now what no one wanted has become the most valuable property around. And so that increase in value of the property increases the demand from developers to come in and look for heirs so that they can then stand in your shoes in court and insist that it be sold. So it is an example of great pressure. And then in the exurban areas around cities, the challenge is that the tax assessments increase through the roof once commercial development moves in. And the counties will tax you on the highest and best use of the property, not what you're using it for now. And so even once families can get clear title, the challenge of Black land loss also shows up in the tax assessor's office because they're taxing it for use that they're not doing. Faith,
Lizzie, thank you. This has been great. Let me move on. We wanted to look a little bit at the breadth and scope of heirs' property issues and the systematic obstacles of urban, rural, race, and regional circumstances. And we have two outstanding folks here. One is Thomas Mitchell, who's professor of law, co-director, program in real estate and community development law at the Texas A&M University School of Law. And I just have to be a little editorial here. Everything I know about heirs property and partitioning, I've learned from Thomas. His scholarship is the most outstanding scholarship on this issue. And he is a policy maven of the first order. And for his work, he was awarded the MacArthur Genius Award this year. So I'm so happy to have Thomas here. Cassandra Johnson Gaither is a research social scientist at the United States Forest Service and at the Southern Research Station. So Thomas, let me start you off by asking you to tell us a little bit about the factors and phenomenon behind African-American property loss.
Sure. Let me just first of all thank the Center for Irish Property Preservation. Jenny and I got a start at a similar time, and to the Aspen Institute. And I got to give a shout out to you, Melvin. And I kind of think of you as godfather because you supported my work at the very beginning of my career. So let me just get that out. Okay, so just in terms of this issue of heirs property, as has already been indicated, it's a subset of what we call tenancy and common ownership, which is the most common or prevalent form of what we call common real property ownership in the United States. What's also kind of important is it primarily, as you heard, results from intestate succession. Is that's how property is transferred in the absence of a will or an estate plan. And during the period of COVID-19, this has surfaced all kinds of racial gaps in our country, in healthcare, in the economy, and Melvin, and your seminal work with Tom Shapiro on the racial wealth gap. But there's also another racial wealth gap that is not little known, and it's this racial will making and estate planning gap. So just in terms of the next slide, if somebody can advance that, it shows that there's a massive gap in will making. This one study showed that 24% of African Americans make a will versus 64% of white Americans. What I think is even more disturbing is for the highest educated groups in any group, in any racial and ethnic group, those with the highest education make wills at the highest rate. So in the white community, this one study showed it was 74% or 73% of white Americans with a college degree to make a will, but only 33% of African Americans with a college degree or more make a will. And we see in the press all the time examples of where this happens, the latest being Chadwick Boseman, who unfortunately died without a will. Part of the phenomenon of not having a will kind of goes back to the period at the end of the Civil War, where as a practical matter, African Americans had a lack of access to lawyers. There were hardly any Black lawyers in South Carolina or anywhere else, and white lawyers, for the most part, didn't want to represent African Americans because it's kind of bad for business. So, and as kind of Faith kind of sketched out initially, is some of the rules governing tenancy and common ownership are very counterintuitive, such that the layman or the average person would not understand how unstable and insecure their ownership is because of these technical kind of property rules. All right, so the next slide could be kind of advanced. All right. So one of the things in terms of heirs property ownership, and some of this has already been kind of referenced, is I think of it legally as presenting three kind of big legal problems. One is this problem of insecure property ownership, and Faith touched upon this about these partition actions leading to partition sales. Sales where judges oftentimes have ordered the forced sale of the property as opposed to what was supposed to be the primary remedy, which would be the physical division of the property and an allocation among the various common owners. And so in many cases where the courts easily could have divided the land, they opted to sell the land. And so the people who petition the court or file these actions, they don't have to own 50% of an interest in the land. They don't have to own 25%. They don't have to own 1%. As long as you're quote unquote a member of the family, including whether you're actually a biological member of the family or you bought in because you're a real estate speculator or developer, you could own a 1/1,000,000th interest, and you're entitled to file these actions, which makes the property incredibly insecure. The third problem was referenced in that really great initial video that Jenny showed of this problem of lacking clear title, which renders your ability to access capital from commercial lenders, from state and federal government departments, agencies, services. It cripples your ability to do that. But then there's a second problem, what I call is the problem of gridlocked ownership, So once you fall into this heirs property type of ownership, because typically you haven't made a will, although sometimes lawyers who are not as sophisticated as they need to be actually create heirs property through wills by basically mimicking what would happen if you didn't make a will. The property owners who end up in this form, as a technical matter, they can exit that form by reorganizing their ownership into some other better common ownership forms, to some type of entity like a limited liability company. But here's the catch. To do so, 100% of those who have a fractional interest in that heirs property have to agree. So even if it's one person, whether it's that real estate speculator or that cousin or whoever, doesn't agree, basically locked into the form of that ownership, which as a practical matter, no real estate lawyer or a lawyer who does wills, trusts, or estates would ever advise people who want to own property together to own it under heirs property or a tenancy in common under the default rules. So I think of that as kind of being a legacy of families who were denied access to affordable legal services at the front end now are trapped into this form of ownership on the back end because of this, what I call the unanimity requirement. Can I get the next slide? One of the things that we're going to maybe focus on, and the manifestation of this problem in the South, maybe among African Americans. I think it's important to note that heirs property presents a problem to every racial and ethnic group, although African Americans are disproportionately impacted. So in addition to African Americans in the rural South, you have African Americans in cities, including New York City and LA and other cities, Latinos in the Southwest, poor whites in Appalachia, and Native Americans and Native Hawaiians, or certain Native Americans and Native Hawaiians, for example. So it's actually a bigger problem than just impacting Black families who own land in the rural South. And that actually has contributed to much of the success I've had in advocating for this model state statute, which will be my last slide that I'll just reference. So I think one of the beauties of the time that we're in is when I started this work 20 years ago, essentially the consensus was that legally nothing can be done. The assumption was that African Americans who owned heirs property lacked political and economic power, so there was no, we shouldn't even bother trying because there would be no solutions, or no solutions any members of the legislature or executive branch would pursue. That's proven to be wrong. It's also been this period in the last several years in terms of other scholarship, whether legal scholarship or social science scholarship. The most productive scholars in the last few years have generated this really good body of scholarship. And then there's, to a surprise to a lot of us, been an incredible amount of media attention. The last thing I'll say is some of my work. I was the principal drafter of this model state statute called the Uniform Partition of Heirs Property Act. We now have 17 states that have enacted it into law, as well as the US Virgin Islands. As you can see from this map, we've had enactments in every region of the country, from Hawaii to Connecticut, from Montana to Florida, and Midwestern states in the Southwest. So I think that what I hope is that this act provides real benefits to heirs property owners, and that it is generative of other law and policy solutions, whether at the state or federal level.
Thank you, Thomas. I'm going to move on to Cassandra because I'd like for you to kind of talk a little bit about your work on estimating and measuring the heirs property problem. We've gotten some sense from that from Thomas, but you've been involved in some GIS applications.
Sure. So one of the first questions asked when heirs property is discussed, especially for anyone just being introduced to the topic, this question comes up: how much heirs property is there and you fill in the blank, okay? In my city, in my county, my state, in my region of the country. And really that is a $64 million question, although nobody really knows how much heirs property is out there. But it's really a relevant question because in order to develop the best mitigation or legal services or policies to address this issue, there needs to be ideally robust and at minimum reasonable and defensible estimates of heirs' property extent or scope, no matter what the geographic scale is. Okay, so I want to go back a little bit historically. So one of the first comprehensive studies looking at heirs' property extent was published by C. Scott Graber in 1978, who examined how much heirs' property there was in 5 southern states. So this is North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, usual suspects, right? And so that research estimated that roughly 33% of all Black-owned land in those states was heirs' property. Okay, and so a couple years later, in 1980, the Emergency Land Fund published results of its 5-state study, again looking at heirs' property extent in some of those same southern states. And that study suggested or estimated about 41% of Black-owned land at that time was probably heirs' property. Now, again, these studies only focused on this issue for Black-owned land. Okay. Okay, so since these first studies came out, there have been a number of other more localized efforts to estimate heirs' property. And most of these involve either one or several counties within a single state, using a variety of methods from reviews of tax records or court records to actually surveying landowners. But I think the common denominator across all of these studies, whether you're looking at a big place, sort of a sub-region of the South, or you're looking at a smaller place, I think the red thread that runs through all of these attempts is the difficulty or the challenges of estimating these properties. And this has mainly to do with the lack of uniformity in accounting for parcel data. When I say parcel data, I'm talking about land records. The lack of uniformity in accounting for parcel data in the U.S. So would you show the first slide, please? And so I pulled out a quote from a 2017 report on heirs' property estimation, and the lead author for this report was Scott Pippen with the University of Georgia. I think this quote really summarizes the impact of the lack of uniformity in recording parcel records and the systemic problems that it creates. And this quote basically says that parcel data in the US is recorded in a very haphazard way. I think Lizzie sort of referenced this as well. And, it's not included in this quote, but the report goes on to say if that better, more consistent land parcel records have been kept by relevant organizations, and some of the problems associated with the 2008 financial mortgage crisis could have been dealt with in a better way. And some of the frustrations encountered by families, by those folks seeking relief in the aftermath of coastal storms, Hurricanes Katrina and Rita, they could have been maybe avoided or minimized had there been better accounting of these records. And this is a really important point, which really speaks to the need to develop a more coherent approach to accounting for land parcels. And it's really important that we understand the limitations that these inconsistencies in tabulation present, because more and more researchers and other folks too, doesn't it just have to be, those ivory tower folks, but more and more folks are turning to parcel records to assess the extent of heirs' property, particularly at broader scales. Now I can stop right here or just sort of pause for any questions follow-up questions that you might have.
Okay, the chat is kind of burning up here.
Yeah.
Thomas, you might want to come back to the a quick description of how you managed to get the partition law enacted. Just a quick description, because many people are interested in that process.
Yeah, so I think 20 years ago it was viewed as impossible. There had been a number of attempts in the southern states beginning in around 1970 with very limited success. Most of them had failed. And I think one of the key things was we got an organization that is kind of like the gold standard for developing model state statutes in the United States. Been around 128 years, called the Uniform Law Commission. Most of you don't know it, most lawyers don't know it, most law professors don't know it, but it's incredibly powerful. And we got them to work with us to be the organization that promulgated it. So that was one, right? That was just amazingly important. Second, it became obvious to me in the 3 years of drafting this legislation that it almost died in our committee 3 times. And one was, it was died because people thought, oh, this only benefits Black people. It will not be successful. So why don't we kill it in committee? I had to then save it by basically saying that African Americans were impacted disproportionately, but all these other communities were. So that was an on the fly reframing this. But that strategy has been incredibly successful as I've gone from state to state. When I testify in legislatures, sometimes I don't mention the race part at all. I'll talk about, you know, all kinds of properties, whether rural or single family homes in municipalities. I'll talk about property rights a lot, actually. And only if I think it's to my advantage will I mention race. Now that we've had a number of enactments, I've been able to talk about race. The one last game changer that I have to kind of indicate is we've gotten up to about 13 states, but we were starting to hit a wall. But there's a provision in the federal farm bill of 2018 that provides incentives to states that have not enacted it into law. It specifically rent preferences, the Uniform Partition of Heirs Property Act. And essentially what that provision of the farm bill says is that if your state passes the Uniform Partition of Heirs Property Act, family farmers and ranchers who own heirs property will be entitled to a greater set of USDA benefits than family farmers and ranchers in states that have not passed it. And I've been able to use that provision to get it passed in Mississippi, which we would have had no chance. We failed twice before the Farm Bill. Florida and Virginia in 2020 over the opposition of the Florida Bar, the legal organization for lawyers in a state, in Florida and Virginia, which is almost unheard.
Thank you, Thomas, for those points. Amazing scholarship that makes a difference. Thank you, Thomas and Cassandra. I'm going to turn this back over to our video.
Hi, at this time, you will hear or see one of our participants who are benefiting from our sustainable forestry program and how that has made a difference in the life of him and his family.
I'm Ronald Richards, and I am a tree farmer. I'm familiar with the land from, I guess, 1950, about 1957 when I can remember. My daddy used to bring me out here. My father, they grew up out here, and at least every summer we used to have to come out as kids, you know, and spend a couple of weeks with grandmother. All we know is that she had a bunch of property. We were standing on the front porch, watched the deer. She had a bunch of cows in here, and then once she got sick and moved away, the property more or less just laid dormant, I guess, for about 25 years. Daddy used to, and his sister, have to pay the taxes once a year. So sometime I'd ride over here with him, and they pay taxes every year. But it just always bothered me that they weren't getting anything, you know, from the property. The property was just sitting there, we were just holding. So we got this property, we don't want to lose it. And I happened to go to the courthouse one day and met somebody that was working with the Center for Heirs, and they suggested to me to try to make an appointment and talk with some people down there that may be able to help me. See, one thing the Center for Heirs taught us was that make the land work for you. Well, I never knew there was anything to a tree, but now I can't drive without looking at trees. You know, it's been quite an experience, and I didn't know it was such a science to it. I think what we had out here was whatever grew, grew. But this is a managed process that he's walking me through, and it's been quite a journey. Hopefully, the generation under me and the next generation, they have something they could come and enjoy, and it doesn't be a financial hardship on them. And something that their grandmom or their great-great-grandmom and father had, and they don't have to lose it. I think about my grandmother, grandfather, great-grandmother, great-grandfather, and the struggles they went through. And I would ever be indebted to the Forester and the Center for Heirs, because leaving something behind for them is fine, but I just wouldn't want to leave this world and not have done something to hold on to their legacy. My recommendation would be make an appointment and either get with the Center for Heirs or Forester and have a discussion first thing, and go from there. They actually came in and did a lot of educating us on how you could possibly keep your property without losing your property. And what I mean by that, a lot of people approached us, but everybody that approached us was approaching for the aspect of buying it. They knew what it was, and nobody ever mentioned, hey, you could take this property and possibly work it. Because David, he'll work it to death, but work it, and then it would sustain itself. You know, I mean, people have always, that's why I say I want to leave something for the next generation, but my grandmother, she was a stickler. She spent every penny she had to pay her taxes and not let somebody just come and swindle her out of her property. And I guess that's why I'm so passionate, about it. It's a thing of pride, and I mean, after the work we put in it, I think we planted like 30,000 trees. I mean, that's the least I could do.
Thank you, Jenny. That was a very inspiring video. I spent 8 years at the Ford Foundation. I traveled the world looking at sustainable forestry, and that brought a little bit of tears in my eyes to see that African Americans are awakening to sustainable forestry. Great. In this session, we want to talk a little bit about the star of the show, the Center for Heirs Property Preservation, what they've done, what they've accomplished, their vision. And we have 3 folks here to talk with. Jenny, of course, Janet, and Darren Gross Sr., who's president and CEO of the Coastal Community Foundation of South Carolina, which, as I described in my intro, birthed the Center for Heirs Property Preservation. Let me start with Janet. Tell us a little bit about Aspen's community strategies group and the work you do, and how you got involved with the genesis of the Center for Heirs Property Preservation, and how this work fits into doing economic development differently.
Sure, Melvin, thanks. You know, as I mentioned earlier, CSG has been around for a while, and a lot of the work we do is focused, or all of the work we do is focused on helping leaders at the local level figure out how can they improve regional prosperity, but at the same time help people who are on the economic and social margins get ahead. And, you know, in that process, we've worked with, I don't know, hundreds, I don't know how many. I've been at Aspen CSG for 27 years, so I lost count a while ago. But rural rooted organizations that are really trying to look at their region as a system. And one set of those organizations is community foundations. So back, Melvin, when you and I were working together on this stuff in the 90s, the Ford Foundation had an initiative that we were managing called the Rural Development and Community Foundation Initiative. And the point of that was to get regional and statewide foundations, and then sub-regional foundations that had rural area, rural geography in their community foundations jurisdiction, but they were really doing most of their work in urban. It was Ford was inspiring them to go out into rural and figure out how can we help low income and low wealth people, places, and firms in rural places do better. And the Coastal Community Foundation of South Carolina was in the mix of a cohort that was funded that we were managing. Now, what happened is what we see is community foundations and others can sometimes serve as a hub in a region to really look at what's going on in this region that no one is in charge of, right? So you've got a region with multiple jurisdictions that shares a common problem or a common issue, but there isn't anyone who is the government of that region, right? There are multiple jurisdictions and drain commissions and counties and whatever. So who can act for the region? And community foundations are one organization that can do that, as can other kinds of organizations, whether they're community colleges or CDFIs or others. So the Coastal Community Foundation sort of was challenged back then to go look in the rural areas and figure out what was going on. And what they did when they were part of the Rural Development Community Foundation initiative, they went out and they really started talking to people in the rural areas to find out what some of the issues were. And it was in that process that they really uncovered in their region in South Carolina the issue of heirs property. Now, and they decided to act on it. Now, what I would say is its connection to what we call doing economic development differently. So a lot of people think about economic development in this country as go find something outside, recruit something from outside to come into our region and make it better. And doing economic development differently, which is sort of a wealth building or wealth creation approach to economic development, is something that is now growing in this country. And the idea is that you're building from within. Rather than looking outside, you look at the assets you have within and build on them to develop the economy. And you're really going for three outcomes at the same time when you do economic development differently. You want to build multiple capitals. And a lot of people just think that the sort of what we're going for in economic development is return on investment, profit, and jobs. And that really is not enough. I mean, a lot of that is financial based. You really want to build individual capital, the health of people, the skills of people. You want to build intellectual capital about how do we know how to, how do we do things? What do we know about how to do things? You want to build social capital. You want to build cultural capital. You want the natural capital to do well and to be healthy and sustainable over time. You want your built capital, whether that's water infrastructure or buildings, to be good. You want better, more political capital, and you want financial capital. So when you're doing economic development differently, you want to build as many of those capitals as possible and not harm any of them. The second thing you want to do is increase local ownership and control of all of those assets. Because a lot, especially in rural America, a lot of control and influence over the assets in rural America is now outside. I mean, it's outside ownership. And the local people can't make decisions. So you want to increase your decision-making power over the assets that you have. And finally, you always want to intentionally, at the front end, include low wealth people, places, and firms in the design of what you're going to do and in the benefits. If you don't think about that at the start, it probably won't happen. So what I see the center did, or the Coastal Community Foundation did back in the 90s, was they really looked at that. And they found the people that the heirs property problem. They looked at the system that was perpetuating it. And they figured out where the gaps were in that system. And they plugged those gaps and created a new system. And they designed their system of legal and technical assistance services to directly go at that. And that would unleash, family wealth building and community wealth building. And, when you think about the sustainable forestry example you just gave, Melvin, I would also say, when you do that, you get wins for everybody. You got a win for the family. You got a win for the health of the land itself. You got a win for carbon reduction. You get a win for US-based industry that wants sustainable wood that they can buy domestically as opposed to going out of the country. And you got a win for community control and ownership. That's doing economic development differently.
That's great, Janet. Jenny,
Yes.
Let's start with, what are the key services that the center has developed to address heirs property, and how do you deliver them?
So for us, and as Janet said, the Coastal Community Foundation, I joined them probably 2 years later when they had already started doing outreach in the community. But the thing that kept being heard, they would hear was, I own land, and that always often led to heirs property. So the center, we were created in a response to to help African Americans hold onto their land and to maximize its use. So 3 ways we do that. It's about preventing the loss and growth of heirs property, resolving the title issues to the land, and helping families realize the value of their land through sustainable forestry, but also while creating working landscapes that is used as a land conservation protection tool. When you usually hear about conservation easements as the only solution, here is one that allows the family to not restrict any use to their land, but yet protect the environment. So primary tools in which we do that is education, education, education. We want landowners to make informed decisions. We don't want to make decisions for them. So we're providing legal education through seminars and providing education on how to operate the forestry enterprises through forestry workshops. We draft wills, because you've heard that's one of the ways to prevent heirs property. We have we also deliver legal services, and we have our own attorneys on staff, which actually offers comfort to the landowner that they know that the allegiance of the attorney who's helping them lies with this nonprofit. And you've also heard Mr. Mackey and his brother talk about that $10,000 that they were asked to pay. So at the center, we don't charge for the lawyer or the paralegal's time, but what we do ask people to contribute is the cost for filing their fees, title search, those kind of things. And we're able to do this through grants and donations. And as long as the individual wants to hold on to the land, not sell it, then we can provide them direct legal services. Last but not least is the technical assistance and access to capital that we are helping families who want to build those forestry enterprises. We're helping those families to access those things where traditionally, as you know, and we've heard, where because you have heirs property, you can't access those cost share programs. But as Professor Mitchell mentioned in his presentation in the 2018 Farm Bill, that is a condition of being able to tap in that program if the Uniform Partition Act is passed. So there have been ways to do a workaround.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to get Darren in here. Darren, would you talk a little bit about the original beginnings of the center and how that came about and the role of philanthropy in this process?
Sure, Melvin. And let me just say to Janet and especially to you, Jenny, congratulations on 15 years of leadership and work in this space and in our region, but frankly, in our country. I think your leadership speaks to what's possible when philanthropy sees itself as society's passing gear. And Melvin, that's sort of the context in which I think Madeline McGee, who was the CEO of the Coastal Community Foundation at the time, sort of saw the role of the foundation contextually, the region, the Tri-County region at the time, because we just had the Tri-Counties of Dorchester, Charleston, and Berkeley. We're going through some challenges, some economic challenges. We just came off of Hurricane Hugo that devastated the coast. The naval base had announced its closure in the mid-90s. And here we are with the audacity to say that we're going to work with an outside foundation, the Ford Foundation, and go and listen to the community and hear what the community had on their heart in terms of their goals, dreams, aspirations, challenges in terms of economic opportunity. And I think what I was not there, but I think what we thought we would discover is quite different than where we ended up. And I think the iteration of listening to our community with the intent to work with the community and not to do things to the community frankly, is something that they established in that we absolutely focus in on now. We think our best work is done in conjunction with the community and its support and driving, frankly, strategy. Janet talked about that a bit. So it was a combination. Before collective impact was a thing several years ago, the South Carolina Bar Association, the Ford Foundation, Aspen, so many people came together under the leadership and auspices of Madeline and the team, and Jenny, was a part of that, to really hear and listen and be responsive to what we heard. And we think that turning outward process, again, codified with Rich Harwood's turning outward model, provides us three things that we still hold on to today. That's authenticity, because we repeat and parrot, frankly, what we hear from the communities. The stories that's been shared today is a significant part of that. Authority, in many cases, because our leadership and others, our board, was able to show up, frankly, with the voice and with the lived experience of others that we could repeat and actually bring into the room, closing the distance between people who want to do good from the foundation standpoint and people who may be the beneficiaries of that good, again, shaping and driving strategy. And then I think most importantly, it was the accountability. I think that Madeline and the team, certainly that board, and Jenny and others understood that what we heard, we needed to do something about. And so that initial grant of $500,000 from the Ford Foundation solidified a lot of work, not just the AIDS prevention project, which was incubated at the foundation, but around the same time, we started and helped develop the South Carolina Association for Community Economic Development Association. Bernie Mazik, who's a part of the team at the time, African-American man leading that organization. We also started the New Fund, Neighborhoods Energized to Win, in a time where funding to support for quote unquote, what we call then Black issues were not the status quo. I mean, I think the foundation led in that way. And so to full circle, 2002, it was a program, 2005, it launched over the last 15 years. I know Jenny will get into the work that it's done. It's been incredible. And one of the things that I think me and the team here at the foundation are most proud of. I'll just end with this: where foundations and philanthropy can play a role, particularly in communities in the South, in the Southeast. I saw the map, the national foundations, regional foundations, doing the work that the Ford Foundation did at the time, Melvin, with your leadership. And that is trusting in and investing in local on the ground leadership, the assets that are there, Janet, and trusting that, being a partner with us and allowing us to drive the change and be sensitive to the opportunities that are on the ground. I think that's so important. Reading reality truthfully. When this thing started, I mean, it took essentially 10 years to get the heirs property preservation nonprofit done, but we stuck in there. So I think philanthropy has to be the word that my colleague Edie Blakesley uses, have stick-to-itiveness, that sometimes these things take time. And not only do we need the financial capital, but we need the reputational capital to be in there for the long haul. And then secondly, finally, I think we have to, as philanthropy, once we read reality truthfully, we have to take action responsibly. That we can't go about this work haphazardly. The data, the research is important, but even more important is the lived experience of the people who we are trying to work with and allowing them to shape the strategy to help us run with the ball and being very responsive and respectful to where they are and how fast they can go. So happy to go more, but that's our role and we're sticking to it.
Darren, that's great. And all three of you really talked about this different kind of way to approach community development, listening to those on the ground, including them in creating the solutions, and supporting them as they go over the long term. It's not about tomorrow. Too many foundations have a quick hit approach. You can't do that. Might you, for our audience, think about what you would say to someone right now who is thinking about this for the first time, this issue, and how would you suggest they approach it?
Well, if that question is to me, I think
it's to all of you.
Yeah, the premier person, and I say this to people all the time, call Dr. Jenny Stevens. If you want to talk about this issue, and I've done it, call Dr. Stevens. She's been there from the beginning. She's got a wealth of knowledge and network and relationship. Start there before you get into it, because I think once you're in, you need to be in, and you need to understand all of the unique opportunities and challenges, but definitely the reward and the benefit. And I think Jenny's the premier resource for that.
Thank you, Darren. I just want to, here's what I really like about working at this organization is that I am a steward of the community's vision. And the fact that we continue to build upon or continue to have partnerships and collaborations to make sure this work happens. And, even to the point where we have created a group of landowners called the Woodlands Community Advocates, where they now have become our boots or our soldiers on the ground to make sure they're spreading the word to their neighbors and their friends about how you can make your land work for you. And I think that's key to remember. It is, as you said, it is about partnerships. It's about staying focused to the vision, but also allow for opportunities. Say, for example, like the Sustainable Forestry Program, when it came through with the U.S. and came through via the U.S. Endowment for Forestries and Communities. That wasn't something we were looking for, but that opportunity presented itself. We brought our partners together, and we created a system for African Americans who are normally left out of the forest industry to have an opportunity to participate. And forestry, by the way, is a $21 billion industry in the state of South Carolina. And the South is considered the wood basket of the US. So you had literally had people or have people sitting on what could be the solution to help them move out of poverty, but they need to understand what they own and they need to have the tools to make it happen.
Thank you.
Yeah, if I can add to that, Melvin, I think one thing I would say is that the situation is going to present itself differently in different places with different population, right? So how heirs property might present itself as an issue in Appalachia, and the other things that you could build on in Appalachia or Native American land might be different. So my advice is to find out about the situation where you are before you figure out how to fill the gaps, because the system's going to be a little different places, different laws, different situations. And I think that once again, the lesson we really learn from this work, which yes, is long-term work of the Center for Heirs Property Preservation and others that are working on this, and I know Jenny wants to mention there are others doing good work on this, that they really talk to the people. And we can't underline that enough. We cannot, there's the saying that now has been going around in many fields, nothing about us without us, right? And I heard in recent, sometime in the last year, I heard someone on the ground turn that phrase around. And what they say, if it is for us, without us, it's not about us. And then indeed, we have a lot of people designing solutions without talking to the people they're designing for. And I'm just going to repeat that. If you're doing it for somebody without them at the table, it's not about them, it's about you. And so we really have to, the best advice is to learn as much as you can, as both Darren and Jenny has said, from the people on the ground who are experiencing the situation and make them part of the design team, right? It's human-centered design focused on changing the system in that place for that situation. And the investments that you make as philanthropy, as government, as whomever, need to be to fill in those gaps, to unleash the power of the system, to grow more wealth for the people who don't have it.
I'm going to close on that because I don't think you could say it much better. If it is for us, without us, it's not about us. Thank you. Jenny, I think I'm gonna turn it over to you for another video.
Yes, but before I cue up the video, just want to reiterate that the Center for Air Property Preservation is not the only organization working on this issue. And just to name a few, there is the Federation of Southern Co-ops and the Land Loss Prevention Project, and many others that you will hear from actually in the breakout session. So please stay tuned. Now, last but not least, here is one of our Woodlands community advocates telling you about her opportunity to serve her community.
I'm Inez Miller, a Woodland community advocate with the Center for Heirs Property, St. Helena Island, South Carolina. I attended the Sweetgrass Basket Festival in Ravenel, South Carolina. Met one of the ladies there, Miss Tish Lynn at the time, and she had some information, a flyer which I took. She said, this program hasn't started yet, but it will in a couple of months. We were heirs to Sam Dudley's property, which is located on Martin Luther King Jr. on St. Helena Island. And during that time, it was about 34 acres of property. And he told us we were heirs to it. And so he gathered the few of us on that particular day, and we all, some of us drove out there, some of us walked from this area to the property. And we actually got lost back there. We had to yell and say, keep yelling, we can't find our way out. But one of the things we did so far is plant trees, pine trees. Something I learned a lot about, that you just don't plant them, cut them, and you need to replant. And that's something we didn't know about over the years. So we learned that, and now we've planted over 25 acres of long leaf pine. The next steps for me and my family member, John Carpenter, was to attend the classes that were taught at the Center for Heirs Property and other various locations around the state of South Carolina. As a woodland advocate, I get training in various things. For example, if you're out on your property, as we are this morning, and someone comes along and they see some pine out on your land or some trees, they might make an offer to you and say that I'll pay you $10,000 for those trees on that land, and to you that's a lot of money. And you might say, sure, what do I have to do? I learned from the center, unless you consult with the right people, those trees could be worth $50,000, and it goes by acreage. All of those types of things is what I learned. I decided that if I have the flyers or information, we were often told if I don't have a direct or an exact answer for you, we were always told, just dial the number to the center. I keep those things pretty much on me. I take them into places like the post office, funeral homes, any place where there might be large crowds or gatherings, even at festivals and events. It's good for information, good information. The same way I learned about the center from that festival, other people attend in mass crowds and mass numbers. So I tell them about what I learned and pass the information on to them. We're trying to help people save their land, save their property, and see how important it is, because too many people are losing it. And I always have a saying I tell people, it's so peaceful out here. I do go to the tax sales in Beaufort County. It's moved now to the Bluffton area. I take them a brochure, rack cards listing all the information. I let them know that the people on the rack cards are right from the Lions End area, a part of St. Helena Island, and that they too are benefiting from the Center for Heirs Property program by planting trees on the property that they own. And for any issue they have at the tax sale, something they don't understand, or is new to them, you know, when you stand up and say, don't bid on my property, it's heirs property, why did the person still bid? There's no one to help them through that course, and they feel devalued, ashamed, that they still don't give up is the main point there. Do not give up. You still have time to get your property back. It's working for me by staying in the family. It will be sustainable for my children, my family members' children, their grandchildren and great-grandchildren. That's what they're trying to do with the property.
That was a lot of passion. Thank you. Well, this is the last of the panel groups. We're all in this together, partnering to create sustainable wealth creation. And we have 4 people on this panel. Ann English from government, who's a state conservationist with the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service in South Carolina. Kelly Terry, who's a senior program officer in the Surdna Foundation and Philanthropy. Jim Porter, who's president of business development in Latin America and soon to be retired from West Rock from the business area. And Christopher Pickler, a board member of Land Trust Alliance and an in-house attorney for legal real estate teams with Lowe's Company. And he's a private landowner. I'm going to ask everyone the same question and give you a little time to talk. Now, each of you come from a different sector: business, private landowner, government, and philanthropy. From your perspective, what is the best reason and what are the best ways to forge partnerships within and across sectors that tackle the problems of heirs property and fractionated land? I'm going to start with you, Ann.
For me, for heirs property, I've been with the Natural Resource Conservation is going on 35 years. And it wasn't until about 2000 that I had a conversation about heirs property. So that was not
an unstable connection.
My agency was even focused on and talking about. And
And I think you have an unstable connection. And I'm going to come back with you, okay?
Okay.
All right. Let me go to Jim Porter from the business sector first.
Well, first of all, I'm delighted to be here today, and I'm learning a lot. This is just absolutely fantastic. But I'm proud to be group president of a large forest products company that focuses on making paper packaging. And certainly the natural resources and wood raw materials are critically important to our industry. And so sustainable forestry, as we were talking about helping the heirs landowners to do a better job on, is very close to our business purpose. I'm also a certified forester personally, and my family and I own forest land in Jasper County, South Carolina. So I come to this conversation with a lot of personal and professional passion. And in answer to your question, what do we do to help this? I think it's lean in. And from a company perspective, we need sustainably managed forests all over the South and all over North America. And so we have a team of foresters, and we're committed to working with private landowners to learn more about the natural resource and technically what it is that's needed in order to be effective at managing very complex science-based growing trees. They don't just grow and you harvest them. There's a lot of, in order to make it truly a sustainable forest, there's a lot of work to be done. And I think we can help with that. I personally want to contribute my own time as well and philanthropy to try to support the challenges that these heirs have. The science of forestry is something that I can personally help with and professionally. But the headwinds that the heirs families face with the complexities of title and fractionated interests is just a very serious, complex thing. And we just need to lean in with philanthropy and help the heirs Foundation and other entities that are working on those subjects.
Okay. All right. Let me ask Christopher Pickler, who's a private landowner, your take on this.
Yes. Thanks, Melvin, and you know, Jenny and Janet. I mean, it's a lot of great content so far. You know, my interest really started in 2005. I guess really around the time the center was getting going. You know, for I guess a decade before that, I started getting involved with land conservation organizations, and have been fortunate to do so across the Carolinas since then. And you know, one of the discussions that I started noticing over time was a desire to you know, improve diversity of staff or board members or things along those lines. And you know, one of the questions that dawned on me, and this will, I think, be addressed maybe in greater depth in one of the breakout sessions, but you know, was really, were the communities that were being sought for input, you know, were the organizations, what were they doing, you know, within those communities? In other words, were you offering something they wanted? And so when I'm speaking of land conservation, you know, from my perspective, it tends to be private land conservation, which typically throughout the U.S. would be land trusts, which are nonprofit organizations that they're set up to hold either land in fee, which is they own the land, as you would think of it, or they would hold they would serve as the third party that would hold a conservation easement. For example, for a property owner, if they did want to conserve it, Jenny referenced conservation easements earlier, as part of working landscapes and sustainable use of the land. And you know, so I think in terms of partnerships, when we think about the land trusts and the conservation easement, which is simply it's really a private contract between the landowner and a third party, where you agree to forego certain uses or aspects of the property. In return, you would typically be able to avail yourself of income or estate tax benefits of doing so. So that model doesn't really work as well with heirs property owners, because you really need the buy-in of all of the heirs owners, you know, to agree to restrict the property. And so, you know, while it might be okay if you have 4 heirs owners, it's a little more of a challenge if you have 48. Going back to Professor Mitchell's slide, where you have to have 100%, and also, you know, you forego development or economic potential of the land if a future generation wanted to do so. So I think, you know, the role then that private, you know, in terms of relationship building is the land trust. You know, they're on the ground in all of the communities. They're working with the natural resource agencies, the land grant extension programs and forestry programs and USDA, and they know all of the programs that you know, could be available. And I think these organizations or land trusts or local land trusts are great resources for for folks to get to know what programs are available in their area. But it takes time. Again, I think as some of the comments have been made, it's it can't just be for a specific grant, project, or consultation. Organizations have to build trust, and I know my examples of the Low Country Land Trust in Charleston, the Coastal Land Trust in Wilmington, the Conservation Trust for North Carolina, and the Triangle all do great jobs of really interacting in community conservation.
You're on mute,
Thank you.
Melvin.
Thank you. I got caught again. Let me go to Kelly for philanthropy.
Yeah, thank you. It is such an honor to be here today with you, Melvin, Janet, and Jenny, and my fellow panelists. And I just want to sort of begin with echoing the call to just call Dr. Stevens, which is why I'm here. Just call Dr. Jenny Stevens. I'm going to get a pin to put on that. But just a little background about how I come to this work. My origins are really in the nonprofit asset-based community development field, where for much of my career, I was an executive director of a community development corporation called the Point CDC, located in Hunts Point in the South Bronx, which for those of you who don't know is they're still to this day one of the poorest congressional districts in the nation. And so this notion of an asset-based approach to the work really resonates with me deeply and continues to really guide how I move through philanthropy and think about what role we have to play in this. And I also want to just talk a little bit about my roots. So I'm born and raised in the Bronx, but my family is from the South. And I have deep matriarch and patriarchal roots in the South. And so I just have to say that I take a humility to this work, and great pride to stand on the shoulders and the legacy of my ancestors in this relationship to land and what it means to our people. And I have to say that I've had a couple of formative learning experiences that I just want to mention because I do think it's important, as many of the panelists before us have noted, to take a learning stance when you're approaching this work. So the first is a Saffron tour that I had the great privilege and honor of going on with Miss Cynthia Hayes before she passed in 2017. And that is really where, along with some folks, Tamara Jones, Kolu Zigbee, Edward Field, Michael Roberts from 11th Hour, and Savvy Horn and others, I really got a lay of the land, so to speak. And I got sort of my first education about what Black landowners were going through and how critical heirs property was to that. And then after that, I really had the great fortune to attend the Grantmakers for Southern Progress. And I don't know if you're gonna remember this, Darren, but you were on a panel with Ashley Woodard Henderson from the Highlander Center, and it just really changed my whole worldview and my perspective. And it was really at that conference where I stood up, I think, in an auditorium of 300 folks and professed and confessed that I was a Northerner with a Southern soul. But then also that I saw that many of the issues that were going on and plaguing our communities, disinvestment, long legacy of disenfranchisement through federal policies and private systemic and private sector, all rooted in systemic racism, that I really did see a direct connection between what folks were experiencing in the South and rural communities and what folks were experiencing in the South Bronx in our urban communities. So that was a very formative learning process to me, and for that I'll forever be grateful. That's also where I met Jenny Stevens, and so the photo behind me is from St. Helena Island. So I just wanted to bring that up. So, I think that first and foremost with CERDNA, we're a 100-year-old foundation and we're a family foundation. And we have done a lot of transition in our strategies over the many years, but our latest iteration really challenged us to think about what were the root causes of social injustice. And that really led us to refine, as a sustainable environments program, which is a program I sit on, our theory of change. And so we have two strategies, but I just want to share with you the land use through community powers theory of change. And through that program, we seek to create conditions that improve environmental quality and community self-determination by improving land use practices and changing land ownership patterns to address root causes of systemic disinvestment within low wealth communities and communities of color. Heirs property is just one form of legalized disenfranchisement of Black landowners are facing amongst a myriad of barriers related to systemic racism. All of you have addressed that, so I won't go really into it. I do want to just say that as an environments program, it's important to note for us that racial justice is the primary outcome that we seek. And so our work to heirs property is resulting in that. I just want to give a little bit of a data point for us about why this matters to our strategy. One, we're working to fill a gap. We understand that the philanthropic sector is one small piece of a much broader puzzle. You have sort of the public and the private sector, but really the public sector, that is my timer, so I'll be wrapping up. The public sector, our dollars are no match, right, for the need, and two, the investments from the public sector. So we really try to fill a gap. I will have to say, though, within philanthropic funding, it's important to point out that about 1.8% of philanthropic dollars go to support Black communities, and that's just dismal. I think the philanthropic support that goes to the South is hovering around 3%. So I just want to offer those data points about why it's important, certain felt, to have a strategy that meant investing in the South in particular. The thing I will end with is just that we do see that, we take an ecosystem approach to our work. And Jenny said, don't use ecosystem, explain what you mean. Okay, so I'm gonna explain what I mean. One, the work is deeply relational. And when I say ecosystem, it's that we understand, as Jenny mentioned, that we understand that there's a whole host of wonderful organizations and actors doing this work. So we try our best to figure out what our role is. In this, we really work to support power building grassroots organizations that are working to, at the local, national, and translocal organizing levels to build long-term power in their communities. And then from that, we see that addressing technical assistance, legal strategies, which is where the center fits in, and also through public partnerships with folks like the agencies like the USDA are really, really critical. The last piece I will mention is that our stance within philanthropy is really about a trust-based approach. And much of what Darren mentioned really resonates with us. We are really trying to practice solidarity philanthropy, which is really about advocating for power with versus power over or empowering. It is not something that we're doing to these communities. Communities have the solutions. Those hit hardest by the pain should be closest to the solutions. I think Ayanna Presley said that, and that really, really sums up the approach that we bring. So happy to be a part of this discussion.
Thank you, Kelly. I want to give Ann an opportunity. Are you back with a better connection?
I hope so, Melvin.
Thank you.
All right. As I said before, it just started. I first really got introduced to the even to the notion of what Centers of Heirs Property was back in 2011. I've been working with the Natural Resource Conservation Service going on about 34, 35 years. And my agency, that was never a topic that was discussed or even focused on until I moved to South Carolina. And then I met Jenny Stevens from the center, and we had this discussion, and we were talking about it. Now, the one thing that folks doesn't know, with my agency, Natural Resource Conservation Service, we're about a 48, maybe $50 billion agency. This is money that we take and spread out through all of the states to help landowners, anybody that has land. And so what that means with folks with heirs property, they were missing out. And we had to find a way to overcome that. Not only were they missing out, they were not even aware of the programs that we offered and how it could benefit them. And so we started working with Jenny Stevens and the Center for Heirs Property, where they were putting on workshops and they would invite us in to come and speak as they were putting on the workshops. Now, these are folks that probably would ordinarily not work with us or even talk to us. They wouldn't have a need to, or at least they didn't think they had a need to. And so over the years, we have done that. We formed this partnership. I call it a relationship. We have a relationship. Jenny like to say we're in the courting stages, but we've been working together. And because of that, as people are getting clear title here in South Carolina, individuals that have heirs property, we're able to work with them as long as they can show where they have been paying the taxes on the land. They are able to participate in our programs, the Natural Resource Conservation Service Program, which is our EQIP program, Environmental Quality Incentive Program, or our Conservation Stewardship Program. And so that can help them do that improvement on the land, whereas they would not have had that opportunity before. And, you know, in my position that I am in, my goal is this: everybody that wants to participate in our program, then it's my job to ensure they have that opportunity. And so working with the center, partnering with the center, you know, as they help people to clear up their titles, and then we're working with them to say, this is what you can do with your land. We can help you replant those trees. We can help you create that wildlife area that you're talking about. And so that is the piece that I see that as USDA, as we get more engaged and working with and coming to deal with this issue of heirs property, is finding an organization to help us get into the door, to meet those clients, to talk to them, to show them this is what you have. Because as I remind folks, some folks say, I don't want to worry about it, but I say, you pay taxes. These are your tax dollars, and you should want to use your tax dollars. And so with that, you know, so we're looking at that. Right now, I can say that Jen and I started working together about in 2012 when we actually kind of formulated the partnership. But however, we've had more people to participate in the programs. And I can say right now, folks that came through the Center for Heirs Property that have participated, that has participated in NRCS's program, we put aside about $1.9 million of individuals that have taken advantage of our programs. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you so much. On the chat, there's a question, a couple of questions about directed to Kelly. Are there resources for people who want to learn about environmental philanthropy?
Okay, so I would say yes, and I would direct you before I would say environmental philanthropy. I would offer resources to learn about the environmental justice and climate justice movements, which range. So Climate Justice Alliance is one. Really great example and resource. You have the National Black Food and Justice Alliance also, which is a great learning resource to learn about the intersections of sovereignty and land sovereignty and environmental justice and those connections. In terms of environmental philanthropy, we are a part of the Environmental Grantmakers Association, but we're also a part of, I would say, a lot of philanthropic sectors that are really about power building and not necessarily issue-based. For those, I would say the Neighborhoods Funders Group is an amazing resource. And then you have Grantmakers for Southern Progress, which I also mentioned. And Justice Funders, I'll put in there because I mentioned Solidarity Philanthropy. So those are just a few resources.
Those are great resources. I'm going to give anyone an opportunity for a 2-minute contribution at this time. We got a little time, so I'm gonna give you 2 minutes.
Well, Melvin, I would just lean in again, and I think it's so important to try to create a sense of partnership with the heirs property owners and private industry and the local communities in which we all work and live, and try to help promote the availability of resources to these heirs property owners. They need help, and I love what the center's doing, and the center has lots of resources to help, but I think industry and private landowners like myself and others in this space need to really just find ways to work together more closely, because we're all aligned on the issues: the environment, the more healthy community, passing along this beautiful land to future generations, and a sense of pride that we all feel by being able to do so is just a beautiful thing. So I think leaning in and partnerships is really important.
I think you captured a very important element of this. This is an issue that cannot be done in isolation. We need partnerships from all the sectors involved. And I thank you for your contributions. And I think we're going to move to our last and final wrap up. Okay. Well, let me start this by introducing our panelists or our final commenters. Jenny's going to comment, Janet's going to comment, and we are very pleased to have Daniel Porterfield, who's the president of Aspen Institute and a former college president. So I'm very happy to have you join us, Dan.
Likewise, Melvin. Great to meet you.
Yes, we've been passing each other in the virtual reality. Let me say a few final points from my perspective. This has been a fascinating couple of hours. I started out talking about systematic racism. And while we know that this issue is not concentrated with African Americans, we are overrepresented. But what that means, in my opinion, is that when you find solutions, the solutions are not necessarily solutions that will only help African Americans. It has a broader application. Second, policy is important. It is exceedingly important, but policy is not everything. We could change policies tomorrow, but I think what the lesson of the center is that policy is crucial, but it's not sufficient. You need to also surround good policy with education and social support. And the kind of social support you need to make these a reality are the kinds of partnerships that we've been talking about. So those are my takeaways from today. And I'm gonna turn it over to Jenny. And once again, congratulations, Jenny, for 15 years. That's a long time for a nonprofit, and you've been just on an upward trajectory from the very beginning. Congratulations.
Thank you, Melvin. I appreciate your facilitating this discussion today. It's been 15 wonderful years, and just want to thank everyone, all the speakers, for participating and sharing today. And I know everybody's going to stay tuned and attend one of the breakout sessions later on. And also thank Janet for partnering with the Senate, or the CSG group of the Aspen Institute, and partnering with us to make this happen. And trust me, there are a lot of people behind the scenes who've made this work well, whom you haven't seen today. So once again, thanks. And Janet, I will pass it over to you.
Thanks very much, Jenny. I want to thank Melvin. Still amazing after all these years, Melvin. What can I say? And to our panelists, our experts, our pracademics. We got a lot of pracademics here, practitioners, landowners that have joined us today and helped us understand the basics of heirs property and fractionated lands, and reminding everyone that this is a Native American issue as well, and called fractionated land there. And there's going to be more discussion about that in one of the breakouts as well. I want to have some special thanks to to the AV people behind the scenes for us who are on our staff, which is Kelvin Deaton and Tyler Botters, who put a lot into it, and Javier from our AV team, and to our partners at the Center for Heirs Property Preservation. I also, it's been such an honor to celebrate this anniversary with you, 35 years for us, 15 for you. I also want to thank one little unsung hero, unsung rural action hero named Alan McGregor, who actually helped bring us together to do this whole work together. And remember, we're only a third of the way through. We're going to have a number, and I'll mention what the breakouts are in just a minute, right? But I want to thank all of you for coming. We've had a lot of people, and we have a lot going on in the chat and the Q&A. And I do want to say right now, we know there was a heck of a lot going on in there, from individuals who have air properties issues to people who want to pass state policy, everything in between. We've had people to whom this is a brand new concept. We are going to take that chat, and we are going to take that Q&A, and we are going to examine it, and we're going to try to connect you all to the best extent that we can. I can't tell you what that's going to be because we have to look at it. But if there's another question you have, put it in the chat now before we sign off in about 5 minutes or 10 minutes, because we will take that and do everything we can to provide you with a list of resources and with contacts, okay? And now, I know he's been waiting for this, even though he hasn't been able to be on the whole time, but I want to turn it over to the president of the Aspen Institute, Dan Porterfield. And I think he wants to join in offering a few closing sparks, right, Dan?
That's a challenge, closing sparks. Thank you so much, Janet. What a privilege to be here, to celebrate, to work on the issues and to celebrate the 15th anniversary of the Heirs Center. And congratulations, Jenny, as well as the 35th anniversary of the Aspen Community Strategies Group. Yay, Janet and your team, which has cultivated such a deep network of the nation's most creative and innovative practitioners of rural community and economic development. I'm so lucky to work at the Aspen Institute for a lot of reasons, who I work with, but also who I work with, who they work with. And because of Janet and the Community Strategies Group, I feel like I've met so many leaders really getting the job done for community and for country, really working on issues that matter, and with incredible principle and heart and talent all in one. So thank you, Janet. The network that you, Catherine, and your team have built, Clifford, is just amazing, inspiring. And I want to thank everybody who's taken part so far, with more to come, as panelists, and as well as everybody listening in, who's going to take away some of the ideas and bring them out into the community further for planning and for action, and definitely for inspiration. And it's really cool to be around Melvin Oliver, our moderator. And I can't wait, Melvin, the chance to really talk to you and learn about how you're leading at Pitzer College, and how your lifetime of scholarship, advocacy, and citizenship all have built up and built up and built up, and now you're leading a whole institution this way. Your expertise is amazing. It's an inspiration. And also, in addition to Janet and Clifford Deaton, who I mentioned, I want to also thank Brett Wadford for this incredible partnership. And I really hope we get a chance, Jenny, to spend some time together. I've learned a lot because of you. When the center was incubated because of the Rural Development and Community Foundation's initiative that the Community Strategies Group managed at the time, it represented the origins of long-term impact and work on land retention and wealth creation. And it really also represented and helped to further and make visible core values of what success looks like in the Aspen Institute, which is an organization, nonprofit, working in partnership with many, committed, though, to driving change towards a free, just, and equitable society. And that's what this work is about. Our partnership is always about trying to solve the hard issues, the issues that are required to live and hear the call to justice, to be drum majors for justice, to think about root causes. That takes time and work and commitment, which is what's at the heart of the Community Strategies Group is commitment. I really think that as an institute that tries to connect others, bring them together into dialogue, that surfaces voices that need to be heard, and that creates ideas that are important and actionable. And then with a spirit of hope and optimism and practicality that can take great ideas and push them forward into action, implementation, and change for justice and for equity. That's what this is all about. And so we at the Institute have had the privilege of hosting convenings that bring the grassroots leaders to the table for a dialogue that you can't have if you don't, it isn't a real dialogue if you don't have the grassroots leaders. And then in dialogue together with each other, with scholars, practitioners, advocates, members of the general public. I'm really inspired by what has happened here today. And it's just some of the things that have been talked about around the role of land and wealth inequality, heirs property, fractionated land, strategies and policies to address the issue and build up rural regions and urban communities that are more inclusive and more resilient. And this is especially important, as I just heard Melvin say a moment ago, because of the systematic obstacles for Black landowners. This is part of being anti-racist, is to work on this and to grow and learn towards progress that is about justice and about equity. Being active as anti-racism calls us to be. Thank you to all who've invited people like me that didn't know enough about the issue to get informed and then get active. And so, and that comes out of the vision of the heirs' commitment to racial justice, to rural development, to conversation, and that leads to conservation and other things. So I hope that this partnership just keeps building around sustainable wealth creation, that we get government and philanthropic sectors to collaborate to build community wealth and restoration in marginalized communities, and to see that this is a critical piece of the large social puzzle around racial inequity and systemic racism, and which we all commit to deconstruct. We have to know enough about the problems to actually contribute to deconstruction. So thank you so much. I just really want to say that today is like a shining example to me of the work that Janet does and the work that the heirs group does, but also a chance for all of us that we're not experts to learn much, much more. So a big congratulations to Jenny and the Center for Heirs Property Preservation for the 15th anniversary, and to the Aspen Community Strategy Group for its 35th anniversary. With respect and appreciation to all of you, thank you. And let me pass it back to Janet now.
Thanks, Dan. What we'd like to do now is, now that we've thanked everyone and sort of had a little, we're so happy to be doing this together. What we want to do is talk about what the next part of the day is, the two other sections that you can come to. We know how ardently many of you are asking questions in chat and Q&A. So here's your chance to learn more and to ask questions. So we're going to have breakouts. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there are 5 breakouts, and we're running each of them twice, 45 minutes each. So you can go to any one of them that you want, and you can go to another one of them that you want. The 5 are legal and policy approaches to resolving heirs property, the opportunities for conservation sector, engaging people of color in their land, building a movement of landowner advocates, heirs property across race and place, and then forestry and wealth creation in the American Black Belt. Now, you received the agenda, the full agenda in an email, and if you go to that full agenda, you will see who all of the session leaders are in those. And I think Clifford probably just put another, in fact, he did in chat. You can see, read about the breakout rooms and join via the links. He's got that link right in the chat right now, so you can find it there. But it was also emailed to you earlier today or yesterday, I think. So there's one session starting at 3:45. So we'll have a break until 3:45 Eastern. Then session 1 will start 45 minutes. Then session 2 will start at 4:45 and go to the ones you want. And then this evening, once again, with its own unique link, and that's also on the agenda, we're gonna have a special treat with America's Forest with Chuck Lavelle, who is a tree forester, but also a musician and keyboard player for the touring Rolling Stones and other bands. But he has produced this series that's been aired on PBS, America's Forest with Chuck Lavelle, and did a whole nother session that's just a little, or a video that's just it's under half an hour that we're going to show, but we're also going to talk to Chuck. We're going to talk to Jenny some more and Yvonne Knight Carter, also a customer of the Center for Air Property Preservation, but also the board chair. I'll be moderating that and taking more questions then. Bring your dinner or a snack or the beverage of your choice. And that's how we're going to end the day. So we're going to sign off for now. Thank you all. There's so many thank yous in the chat and the Q&A to all of the speakers today. And we can't thank you enough. Thank you, Melvin. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Jenny. Thank you all. And we'll see you again at 3:45 Eastern. Cheers.